But the other thing is because we're usually in companies of 50 to 150,000 people, we can get looked at as big brother, even in the Orwellian sense. So I always find these conversations are kind of fun because they're very different assumptions on the table. But for myself, as I said, Dave Newstetter, Medtronic Ventures. So I've been doing this with Covidien and then Medtronic for 11 years now. Before that, I had a somewhat similar role at Stryker, a little different. So I've been watching this for a while. Medtronic, in terms of its venture capital practices, as probably most of you know, we're a very large med tech company, around 90,000 people. About 2 years ago, we changed our business model a little bit on the venture side. We went from having mostly business unit-driven investments to mostly corporate-driven investments. So I'm part of a 5-person corporate team that if a company's looking for investment along typical VC rules as opposed to a structured deal or a licensing or distribution agreement, which our BD folks would handle, we tend to work with the companies. So just to cover our parameters really quickly, we're really looking for 2 things. We're always looking for strategic fit, and in many regards that gets defined as the call point, the physician call point. And then beyond that, we're really looking for traditional venture-like returns. As far as bite size and some of those other things goes, we're really pretty flexible. It's really those 2 key parameters that determine our level of interest and engagement. We tend to work with our businesses on diligence and try and get to the best answer for the company. But ours is the group that stands up to our CEO and says, you know, we're willing to take the risk on this investment.
I'm Jeff Moore. I've been with MP Healthcare Venture Management since 2008. Before that, did a PhD in molecular biology and MBA. Our firm is funded by a Japanese company, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma. Different from some of the other firms, probably. We're actually a separate corporation, typical Delaware corporation with 1 shareholder, which is Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma. We invest globally and just in biotech. So during some of our discussions and maybe in some of the follow-up questions, I think something you'll notice is that corporate venture firms do business very differently depending on the sector they're in. So in pharma, we do things one way. In devices, you'll do things something a little bit differently in terms of access to technology and so on. So I'd keep that in mind, for your specific interest. If you're interested in pharma, focus more on those aspects. I wouldn't generalize across any CVC in terms of the rights and things like that are required with the investment. So.
Great. Sean Chain. I've been with Philips for about 6 years. Prior to that, I was in management consulting and did a PhD as well. We focus on strategically investing in the broad portfolio of Philips, which ranges from really consumer health, where there's a lot of devices and applications and nutrition and platforms, going all the way across to imaging, radiology, AI, very interested in that, as well as connected care, where some of our patient monitoring platforms are. So the way that we approach investment is not really for acquisition track, so we're a bit more of a traditional investor, not strategic terms. We focus on Series A and B investments, where a lot of digital health companies can come in, and we can come in and sit on their boards and scale them up once they have a couple of $1 million of revenue to tens of millions, and then more move towards exit. The other purpose we serve is as a fund of funds as well. So we have about 10 positions across the world, mostly in North America and in Western Europe, and so those give us good looks into the various markets, ranging from therapeutics on the one end all the way through to digital health as well. So I won't sort of go in depth about the very specific areas, but what we really want to focus on the next 10 years is cardiology, oncology, mother and child care, population health, and finally some of the cutting edge stuff like digital pathology, as well as working with pharma companies as well to contribute to the technology medtech side of that facet.
Good. Hi, this is Claire Lemont from Samsung Venture. And so here I represent the investment firm from the conglomerate, Samsung. So our job is to find investment deals, opportunities that will serve at least one of the LP in the conglomerate. We mostly only invest on strategy, and this can serve very different businesses. And so one of our job is really to do some matching between the deal opportunities, investment opportunities at the right LP. Samsung is active in electronics, as you may know. So as far as healthcare is concerned, that's going to go into digital health or sensors or connected health. We also have a financial presence in a number of area, including insurances. So that means we're interested in deals that will affect the way patients are insured or their benefits or benefit management. We also have biosimilar company and biologic plant that is the #1 capability in the world. And so these two entities are looking into investing into startups and have built relationships for future maybe customer relationships or portfolio acquisition. And there are many other areas that may or may not be related to healthcare, but basically I joined Samsung Ventures 2 years ago, so I'm relatively young in the VC world, but I'm an old R&D person. So I come from the pharma, and so I basically am trying to adjust the Samsung strategy with regard to healthcare and both in drug development opportunities and in connected health.
Thank you. All right, Sean, you're up. You know, as I mentioned earlier, people don't always know how strategics are going to perform as investors, and certainly I hear questions sometimes either from investors or entrepreneurs about, are there other things you have to worry about with a strategic investor? Are they going to, you know, ask me for things I don't want to give up at the moment of weakness? Is there a risk of IP leak? That sort of things. What do you hear about that? How real are those risks, and how do you mitigate them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can provide sort of how we do this at Philips, and I love, you know, my co-panelists to comment on it as well. I think there's two stages of this. The first one is that the corporate venture groups are actually off on its own a little bit. You know, there's somewhat of a Chinese wall in which when we sign NDAs, you know, we take the responsibility and liability as corporate ventures, although there is sort of Philips behind us. And so the information that gets passed to me or one of my colleagues, whether in Amsterdam or Boston, really stays within the corporate team. And so that's really one level of, I guess, protection against any type of IP leak. The second thought I had was basically, usually when we talk to companies who have concerns like this, it's a valid one. I think, you know, it's a valid concern. However, if you think about corporate, we're not very cunning or agile. You know, we look to early stage companies to be agile and fast in development. In the scenario where there was some sort of idea that, you know, you had that gets communicated to corporate, more often than not, most of the time, the bureaucracy and the lack of agility of the corporate really won't go anywhere. And so I think, you know, based on those factors, it's relatively safe to share, you know, ideas. Obviously, when you get to very specific IP, you know, do it under NDA. That's, you know, how we would operate. But, you know, we wouldn't enter into the NDA process just because of the massive legal, you know, hoops that we have to jump through until we start diligence, which is, you know, after maybe 3 or 4 meetings. The third point I'll make is, you know, we're still investors in this ecosystem as well, and so our individual reputations are also on the line, right? So it wouldn't really bode us well to basically take your IP and then share with our company, and then we get into some sort of legal battle about this. So we try our hardest to actually, you know, protect our reputation as well as, you know, your secrets, and we kind of act as that barrier between that big bad corporate, if you want to think about it that way, and the small agile innovations that you guys are offering.
Yeah, I can quickly echo that. We're set up as a separate company, so we have sort of more than that sort of theoretical wall between two departments. We actually are a separate corporation. Having said that, our board of directors is comprised of members of the parent company. Our investment committee is comprised of members of the parent company. So we just don't share anything with members of the parent company without explicit approval from the portfolio company. We actually have a two-step CDA process before we get the information in and then before we share it with the parent company. So.
Claire, are you firewalled off that way? We're not, it's all covered, but please.
It's very similar. So the fact that we are a separate investment firm and we are not investing out of the balance sheet is taking care of some of these issues. And we are definitely in first line in terms of filtering, as was said before. Nothing different.
Yeah.
We don't have the two-step NDA process.
So this is actually interesting to me because we're not set up this way. We, in our NDA, do include the whole company, and we rely on our operating businesses to help us with diligence. So that's really a critical part of our model, and really part of our function is to build intelligence for the company around potential acquisition targets. So that's the path and the decision we've made. But the other comments that Sean made, I would echo 100%. One is, we're typically working with other people within the company who understand NDAs and the importance of them. And specifically, as a director, obviously I have fiduciary responsibilities to the company itself, or if you're an observer, we always have language in that would require us to be excused in the case of protected information. So we're not, I haven't been in a lot of board meetings where we're inventing devices typically. The board involvement's usually at a very different level, so that particular concern I don't have much of an issue with. And I think as far as the rest of it goes, from my perspective, it is what it is, right, in terms of what the company does. And I would say that if things are going well, having a strategic on your board, either as a director or observer, means you got a champion within your potential acquirer who can shout that from the mountaintops and talk to the GMs and the CEO and say, you got to get this before somebody else does. And if things don't go well, that message is going to come back too. So I don't think you can have it both ways on that point, but I think some of these other concerns to me are less substantial. Okay, Claire. How does your organization think about the venture fund? What are the specific objectives, and just in terms of people being able to see through that, what are you incented on?
Yes. So we have as many funds as we have LPs, and so at this time it's 47. Most of them are vintage closed, but for each of those funds we have kind of some attributes attached to them, and so we know what the LP is kind of looking for the future. Usually it's either enhancing business, building a new business model, building a new relationship with the customer, or anything you can think of that contributes to this business area that is usually somehow fleshed out. In the way, for example, we know in which sector, which kind of keywords or which product we are after. But it's vague enough that we still have flexibility to actually identify a deal that matches. When that happens and we're able to match a deal opportunity with the LP, the conversation starts usually non-confidential and then become confidential. And as it evolves, we realize if there is actually a piece of strategic potential there. And it's pretty open and really depends on, again, the opportunity and the LPs. So that's the way we think about strategies. Like, is it going to grow the business in a way or another on the long run? It could be by, again, a relationship as a customer supply. It could be a relationship of portfolio with a licensing deal. It could be an acquisition. It's not always planned from the beginning, as for anybody probably here, but there is the concept that it would be feasible and would be beneficial to both entities. That's the other thing. Strategic means strategic means that it's going to be strategic for both the portfolio company. It has an incentive to go forward with us, and it's going to be strategic for us, for the LP. And so the fund size varies, the check size varies, and the expectations as well. Most of the time, as far as healthcare has been concerned, we didn't have rights or any strong tie attached, but more kind of a preferred pathway for upcoming deals or negotiation. I don't know if I addressed all these questions. Financial gain is really important for us as well because we're an investment firm. So basically, strategic is the first box to tick, and the second box is that it needs to be financially beneficial to the investment firm because we are a separate entity and we need to make returns. So for us, it's really both, and we have two teams of executives to convince, really. The teams that is going to look at the strategy bit and the team that is going to look at the projection, financial, and how it's going to return to SVIC, which is Samsung Venture Investment Corporation. Impact, but the one we hope really usually is a product that's so successful that it becomes part of the galaxy of Samsung products or an acquisition.
Sean or Jeff, any similarities or differences you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think we're a relatively new fund, so we were structured out maybe 4 years ago and started making investments 2.5 to 3 years ago. So we're relatively new and still trying to educate the wider organization about ventures. Previously, I sat in the strategy M&A organization, so everything looked like something to buy, right? And with early stage companies, that's not something that is healthy to actually acquire by a big corporate. And so we have to educate the executives as well as the rest of the company around early stage ventures, what it means and how to derive value. I think sort of unofficially, how we're measured is through commercial value delivered to the organization. Now that could be through knowledge, strategic steering based on where the companies are seeing sort of the customers going. Business models, which is a big one that I don't think many of our own organization thinks about, is instead of spending $50 million to try out a new business internally and having it probably fail, we can invest $2 million in a Series A in a company and have them go out and try a business model. And if it works, great. Let's adopt that and talk about other inorganic actions. If it doesn't, it's a $2 million sort of write-off if it's a complete failure, which oftentimes it's not. And so I think we try our hardest to develop partnerships between our portfolio companies and the wider organization, and that's how we're measured. I would say though that I think in year 3 now there is a cycle going on, and what I observe is by year 3 the returns matter a little more. This quarterly traded public company starts asking questions about these $330 million that you deployed. Where are the returns? Oftentimes they forget that we didn't spend the $300 million. It's just sitting there as an investment that you'll hopefully get back at some point. I think long story short, it's a lot of education right now, and we're measured by really commercial partnerships.
Thank you. Yeah. So envelope 3 is actually for me. It's a question about disagreements really between financial investors and strategic investors, and I really see that as a shades of gray kind of question. The question was, do strategics care less about financial returns than financial investors? And that's probably true a little bit, maybe, or at least a strategic investor cares about other things in addition to the financial returns. I'd say that we've had top quartile investment returns in medtech in our group, and that's not because we don't care about returns, obviously. But it's true, we do see things differently than financial investors a little bit sometimes. But my answer on that is really that that's a very healthy thing. That at the board, there's a little bit of misalignment between early investors and late investors. Who's looking to deploy more capital and who's looking to harvest. Between operating partners who may be independents on the board versus financial investors, obviously between management. So there are all these different subtle misalignments between different board members and different stakeholders at the board. And hopefully the 80% is the alignment that everybody has around the success of that portfolio company. But I think that diversity on exactly what you're focused on and exactly what you bring to the table is a real strength of a good board. So we like a board that has financial investors, has strategics, has independents, and of course a good CEO and chairperson.
Yeah, I'd say I think we have more, on the biotech side, I think we have more in common with institutional financial investors than where we differ. The only area we probably differ is a timeline. So many financial investors have a fixed time fund where they have to distribute funds back to their limited partners. So we find them sometimes rushing to get an exit with some of our companies if they're trying to raise a new fund and they need to get money out of the company, which is not good for the company. So, you know, I find corporates tend to be a little more patient and willing to hang around and really see the company through its best sort of organic progression as opposed to rushing an exit. So, otherwise, I don't see much of a difference. When we're, you know, after we invest, we're a shareholder or a board member, and we have those legal and sort of ethical requirements more than we do to represent our parent company. So.
Well, I think we are more strategic in the way we invest at Samsung, but in general, because we have these two sides and the investment firm needs to be successful as well, this tension that is on the board we also experience ourselves. And I would say that probably all investors do, even if their heart is more strategic or more financial. I agree that it's probably very happy. It really all depends on the dynamic and who gets to influence more.
Thanks. And then maybe just to add a comment on my own comment, I think the other area of difference between most financial investors and most strategics, at least in my space, is the other resources we have available. So I do find with my portfolio companies, even though they have a regulatory consultant, they have, you know, clinical advisors they work with, reimbursement consultants, etc., they do value saying, hey Dave, can you check with your business's reimbursement person for a perspective on this? And we try and do that. And I think that perspective as a potential acquirer is comforting to you, right? It's not always aligned. I find that in many areas where a company is getting advice, there's room for a range of opinions, right? So it's not a matter of there's one opinion that's right and they got that from their consultant, so why do they need a second opinion? It's more triangulating and understanding risk balance. So I think that's another benefit that strategic investors can provide at the board when appropriately used. Jeff. This question's focused around mistakes that you see. I don't know if mistakes is the right word, but when you're dealing with folks that are looking for financing, what are some of the things they do, or maybe they're shooting themselves in the foot that from hearing you today they'll avoid in the future?
Yeah, again, I'll give my answer from the perspective of a biotech, pure therapeutics investor. We find, you know, everyone at our firm has a PhD or an MD, and we find sometimes companies come in and spend more time talking about the market for the product and so on, and not really concentrating on the data and the science and the technology. And, you know, as a corporate VC, I think something that's pretty consistent across the board is that we're interested in very innovative companies. We're not really looking for financial gain in a one-year investment to flip some product, you know, some out-licensed product and then do a phase 2 trial and sell it. We're really looking for the next generation of products for our parent company. They can do all of the sort of standard stuff with the current technology, current state of the technology. So we tend to look for really innovative things, and we really, because of that, we focus on the technology. Many of the things, again, this is specific more to biotech, but we don't expect our companies ever to sell product. We expect them to either go public or get acquired before they have a product on the market if we're doing things properly. So we don't really even know which disease area this product is going to be in many cases. It might be a biochemical pathway that they're targeting or a new antibody platform technology. We really have no idea if it's going to be used in cancer or inflammation or neurology. So it's really kind of a waste of time, in my view, to do financial modeling on revenues that are coming 10 years down the road in some undecided disease area. So again, the take home is, for me, I really want to see the data. I don't need to see a huge assessment of market in certain diseases. But that's very, very different from other types of companies, and I'd love you guys to chime in on that. Once the investment is made, I think the biggest mistake that management makes, or the biggest thing they should avoid making, is lack of transparency. You know, when we invest in a company, we consider ourselves part of the team to help that company succeed. There's absolutely no benefit in a CEO or CSO trying to, you know, not cover up, but trying to avoid talking about a bad result from an experiment. You know, we're not going to hold the CEO or the CSO or anyone in the company responsible if the result from an experiment done well is you know, not what we hoped. You know, that's science. That's, you know, it's a very risky business, and that's not going to impact our, you know, the reputation of those people at all. What will impact their reputation and the success of the company is if they try to cover that up, or they spend a year trying to basically make it look better by parsing out the data, rather than just coming to the board meeting or contacting the board and saying, listen, this didn't work out. This is what we're planning on doing next. If it really doesn't work out, we're going to drop this program and move on. You know, we'd rather see something killed fast based on good experiments than dragged on for a year or two. And I've seen both, and it's, you know, it's not great when you have, you know, to spend time and money wasted on things that we probably knew wouldn't have worked 2 years earlier. So.
Any other comments on this point? Things, advice for folks looking for money that they should avoid?
Well, just to be realistic with timelines and cash requirements, because especially in life science, it's true as well in device and connected health, but especially in life science, time goes by very fast, and so each round needs to basically capitalize on the previous one, and so being too over-committing or too promising is not going to play well in the long run. It goes with the transparency, but sometimes there is no intent to cover, it's just being very optimistic, and so it's just being realistic is good.
You know, I'd also comment with the timeline, if, you know, if we have a company come to us and say they're raising $10 million or $20 million, that's a red flag. You know, I'd rather see a company raise, you know, $14 million, or at least show us a timeline with it, you know, a very basic Gantt chart that says, okay, this is what we're going to use the money for. It's going to cost us $12 million to get to filing a phase 1, so we're raising 15, so we have some buffer. You know, if they just come in and say we're raising 20 million because we want to move the product into the clinic, that makes us think they haven't really understood what's required to get it there. Have very clear milestones, what's going to create that value for the Series A round or the Series B round. Because it's going to be a challenge if we have no data and we're going out trying to raise more money.
So I'm going to paraphrase a comment from the last panel I was in, where he said something about you know, treating every meeting with a potential investor as a consulting opportunity. And I'd say, to me, the flip side of that is not treating it as a car salesmanship opportunity. Most of the investments we've made, we met with the company in a prior round and said no, and then met with them again in the round where we invested and said yes. So I think that looking at it as a relationship of years, even if that first meeting is, you know, there's no fit today.
Could be with a different company as well, the same person in the next company.
Absolutely. So I think that looking at it as a relationship building opportunity, and, you know, trying to scale the effort to the opportunity at the time. If there's no investment opportunity, I think it's better to realize that quickly and use the opportunity of the time for relationship building and for advice, if you can get it, or introductions where appropriate. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, just to add to that, Dave, I've seen companies where I've gone down to diligence for over a month or 2 months even, and we ended up with a no, or, you know, let's wait and see. And some founders you can read, their emotional maturity and sort of take that, and we really respect that. But others, they react somewhat negatively, and I think that really burns a bridge, not only for this round but other rounds, where I think you still probably be looking to a corporate like us to raise the next round, but also our LP portfolio as well as some of the others. So I think understanding from your end, there's a lot of time putting into this, and sometimes it's just not a positive outcome. But I would try to react to that in a more business-like sense, and not so emotionally. And that's one of the bigger mistakes I see.
Although we always, without exception, get an email like 2 years later when their company sells for $1 billion. It's always very polite. We're polite in our response.
Told you so emails, right?
Pretty much.
Or we buy them for much more expensive.
He's clearly not a medtech investor. So I think we're at a good point here to open things up to questions. So any questions for any or all of us? Yes.
I've not managed a strategic partnership in one of my startup companies at this point, but I wonder, might there be from a strategic, because you are aligning to potential activities that are going on in your company, that if there are decisions that are being made that are strategic about where a product should go, if there's a leaning and some pressure that may come to keep you into a fold which is more aligned to the strategic partnership, should something like that happen?
I'll take my quick shot at that, which is to say, for our group, there isn't, because we always have a dual commitment. We want to help the company succeed to the best extent possible, and that's what's going to help us get returns. And we're looking at things through that lens always. I think to your question, there will be individuals within our company, within the relevant business, who may have a view on where the technology is going to be most complementary to what we do. So when that dialogue happens, we try and be pretty transparent about that. It might be a conversation along the lines of, this may make sense for you, but if you go down this path, we're less likely to acquire you, and that's fine. We're here as a financial investor in that case. So I think both those things can happen, and as the strategic investor group, our group is to do the best thing for the company, to ensure financial returns, and make sure there's honest communication happening from both sides.
Yeah, I'd say if we're doing our job properly and in picking companies properly, that should be a natural dialogue that's going to happen with our parent company. For example, oncology is not a high priority area for our parent company, so if a company comes to us and has a pure oncology pitch, we'll very immediately say this is not a strategic fit for us. So we're not going to go in there and then try to force them to go into neurology or something like that. Having said that, sometimes the companies have a platform and they do go in the direction that's best, that the management thinks is best for their company, and we're okay with that. We continue to follow on in subsequent rounds because, again, we're a shareholder in the company and we don't want to destroy our reputation by looking fickle and dropping companies. It can be very damaging to a biotech company if you have a pharma investor that backs out after one round of investing. So we're very acutely aware of that. And that is not an easy discussion with our parent company, with my board of directors, but it's one that we've, very, very passionate about, and we make sure that we don't walk away from companies if there's a shift in strategic fit. So.
Yeah, I think, agree with my co-panelists here on the comments. I've seen it both ways for Philips. I think for the ones that are easy for us to actually fit, they usually have some sort of small pilot or relationship already with one of our businesses. Then I can bring that narrative and say, this is already gaining traction internally. Can we expand that with an investment, and sit on the board and then help them be their Sherpa across the organization. Now, there's a bit of a risk with that narrative because if you already have a strategic relationship with Philips, what is the point of the additional investment? And so there needs to be enough sort of additional value with our investment as a strategic to to have that narrative to pass investment committee. I've also seen, us investing in companies that are quite far field, and, at the time, everybody's like, huh, I don't really get it. And, a few years later, we do start seeing the need for this. So if we've done our jobs right, actually, we predicted the future and how this, giant oil tanker Phillips is steering, it will meet that need, and that strategic relationship will form naturally. So I've seen it both ways.
I have a portfolio of university spin-out startup companies. How early is the appropriate time to approach each of you in your respective areas?
Yeah. So let's each take that one. So for Medtronic, if it's a licensing opportunity, our businesses will look at that whenever. And I frankly find that on the medtech side, a lot of the sort of zero-stage stuff coming out of tech transfer, some significant fraction of it is really more a licensing opportunity to the company. If it's an investment opportunity through the venture group, we prefer to invest alongside of other investors and with a management team in place. After that, we'll look.
And we're happy to look at the earliest stage when, it's faculty and maybe a postdoc, creating the company before it's incorporated. No full-time employees. We're happy to look at those opportunities. But we most likely do it with another investor, one of the many early stage investors in Boston at least.
Yeah, same here. So I think we split into clinically regulated stuff and sort of non-regulated stuff. So the digital health side, we are interested in talking when you're at, a couple $1 million in ARR and ready to scale up. So you've really proven that out, but you need that capital to scale up and maybe the channels of a corporate like Philips. And then lately it's been moving more towards B as well. So real sort of, ready to scale up. On the regulated side, it spans across the board. You have to go through, you need that capital to go through clinical trials. We understand that. And so, it could be something from the C stage, through to Series C, where it's an investment, and then after that, it's usually an acquisition track. But I would say how likely one of our businesses wants that asset technology and how complementary it is usually answers that question.
Yeah, for Samsung, if it's a business that is core or considered core to the conglomerate, let's say electronics or semicon or chips, for example, as early as possible is probably the best way to take it, because it can totally accelerate the development. It could be very early partnership, unless there is an intent from the portfolio company to grow it and then maybe have it acquired, and maybe from that perspective you want to manage that relationship and come later. If it's somehow a new industry, for example, life science to Samsung is a new investment area, even though we have already businesses. We'd like to see preclinical data, and we feel safer co-investing with other solid investors. And in between, from a digital health or connected technology, there are a range of possibilities, and it's really determined in the discussion. We like to run pilots when possible for digital health or some technologies, and we, depending on which entity is sponsoring the fund, we sometimes help with the commercialization. So that would feel a bit like what you were describing. So it really depends, basically, depending on the industry area.
And I think another factor here is how much money you can put in at a different stage. For us, we would typically stay under 20% to stay under cost method accounting. I'm not sure if that's true with everybody.
Yeah.
We have a question in the back.
Oh, shoot.
Hi, yes, I'm
Thank you.
Kayla from Sweet Bio. So we have a biotech med device company, and we just received FDA clearance, and we're starting to get a bit of inbound from strategics asking, hey, can you send me something? So when you think of the, hey, can you send me something? What are the best that you've seen? What are some components, whether it's in a one-pager or in a non-confidential deck that you think are rock star components have to have and are expensive?
Can we all agree we don't like receiving business plans? Is that-
We don't like writing.
We do.
She's past that.
20-page slide deck. I mean, a one-pager I find not very helpful. There's not enough there to, my opinion is there's not enough there to really, I don't even read them anymore. I just want a slide deck, even if it's 10 pages. It's much more helpful.
So this
With
is,
no confidential information, of course. We're very, very sensitive. You know, some VCs don't mind receiving confidential information. They actually encourage it because they don't like signing CDAs if they're looking at 10 companies in the same space. We absolutely do not want to see confidential information based on the, you know, perception of leaking information to the parent company and the risk of our parent company at, you know, receiving that information. So just a, you know, non-confidential thing.
so this is funny to me because I was in another panel room earlier where this question was asked, and everybody on the panel said, oh yeah, one pager, maybe 3 pages, no more than that. And you know, I have the same view as Jeff here, whereas if I get a one-page Word document, you know, it's not substantive enough that I feel at the end of spending the time looking at it that I really know much more. So I'm in the same boat of preferring the 20-page deck.
I want to see some graphs,
Yeah, and,
basically,
you know,
or
yeah.
some data.
And I may not read through it the same way it was intended, but I prefer to be able to flip through it and see which are the questions that occur to me at a high level. You know, does it check the box in terms of whatever framework that our group uses to invest? Does it look like there's some reasonable possibility that you would meet those criteria? And that's really what I'm looking for when I see a deck like that.
So send the one-pager and the deck. There's no,
I think that's probably right, yeah.
I also like I like the slide deck that's like to the point and some data, and I also like a quick summary, but in simple language of what is it that the company or the product does that is different or complementary to, you know, the very quick summary is very helpful because we receive a lot of information, and if we spend too much time triaging, we kind of lose sometimes some attention in the way. So yeah.
yeah, I mean, just for this meeting, for example, you guys probably had the same experience. We had something like 120 invitations to meet, and it just, you know, obviously we're not going to read through every single slide of everything. So if you can concisely say which area you're in, so for example, pure oncology, that's an easy decision for us, unfortunately, or ophthalmology or something like that. But if it's any other area, we'll take a look and open up the slides and read further. So try to be very concise with the emailed body, right?
So, yeah.
I'll just say one more comment. For us, you know, based on our process, you know, that initial email to us helps me understand whether I can build a narrative off of that and talk to one of the businesses. So it should be more detailed enough that, you know, I can sell it to a business and see if there's any feedback there to get to that, you know, 1 hour meeting, which then you can sort of present through screen share some of the more specific stuff. And usually I think, you know, that requires some timeline around, you know, regulatory approval, maybe ballpark of amount of capital required, and then, you know, what the actual thing does, and maybe even reimbursements if it's about that. But yeah, certainly nothing confidential. I usually ask for, you know, marketing level, you know, materials. So that's that initial guidance for us.
Thank you. So I think we have time for just one more question, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question on the strategic value that you can bring to the parent organization, since this is an important aspect. I was curious to know more like what's the percentage of your portfolio companies that has an interaction with your parent organization. What's, in your opinion, are the key components to have a successful interaction, or what are the things that may not work based on your experience?
So can I get the pharma side of the question, and then you guys, because I think it's more substantial for you guys, but on pharma, it's a surprisingly low number of companies that do portfolio companies that do deals with the parent pharma company. A few years ago, I did a survey with all the CBCs I knew that were doing pure pharma, biotech, and no one had, and they were very, very sensitive about this information, so obviously I'm not going to disclose too much, but no one had more than 20% of their portfolio that was doing deals with their parent company, and that was where we were as well. And that becomes a very tough discussion with your parent company if they're looking to do a deal with every single company that you invest in. But, you know, when 20% is the maximum across the industry, that helps. So, and I know it's different on the med device side.
Sean, Clary, comments?
Yeah, I mean, we hoped, every company we invest in, we hope to do a partnership. And I'll caveat that by saying that in our direct portfolio, it's mostly digital health companies, so it's not a device that's been gone through trials and all this stuff. You know, I would comment that, you know, external venturing is compared with internal innovation, right? So what I see is if you start a project internally for 5 years, you fund it for 50 million to 75 million usually, and that works out sometimes, but usually doesn't. Again, you know, you compare that to external venturing and how many, you know, shots on goal we can make, and they all aren't scores, but, you know, 5 to 1 is pretty good still for that. And
I'm not saying these products
Yeah.
succeed, I'm saying that there's a BD deal.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
a very
even
different
sort of
metric, yeah.
commercial contribution, I think,
Yeah.
at the end of the day to the P&L is at the end, you know, what the CEO would measure, and that's something I think, you know, is still pretty good, you know. So it's also probably going to be low, but we try for everyone.
Yeah, it's highly variable in our shop. I think the conversation takes place at the time of the equity investment, so if there's a good fit, we know it right from there, and it usually gates the investment. So there is always that opportunity. So in that sense, there's 100% of onset, if you mean, of discussion, goodwill. Then with time and how the company, the portfolio company, you know, develops, grow, and how, you know, our businesses evolve, things sometimes transform into deeper ties. I don't have numbers for you. I don't know the stats.
So every investment we make is strategic. So, you know, there's that. And then every diligence process we do, we engage with the business unit, whatever extent they want to. So they calibrate that more than we do, frankly. Then after the fact, because those relationships have usually been established to some extent, it's usually pretty easy for us to bring the business unit people back. Sometimes we'll even ask for 2 observer seats and have somebody from the business unit take 1, where that seems mutually desirable. And if not, it may be the portfolio company coming to us and say, look, we have a question, can you check this? And I find that, you know, most of the professional functions in our businesses, those people are passionate about their work. Sometimes you'll find somebody who is, I'm exhausted, don't ask me. But more often than not, people think it's fun to work with a portfolio company, and they'll offer up time. So I'd say a very high percentage, there's engagement. And then in terms of the acquisition rate, it's, you know, it's.
So you guys don't have rights built into the investment, any of you, or?
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
Most
So-
pharma doesn't.
So our group doesn't have rights built into the investment. Sometimes our business units will, so that oftentimes when we engage, there's sort of 3 speeds, right? It's not interested, won't get out, or maybe it'd be interesting if it works, too early for us, and that's a venture investment. And sometimes it's, we love it, you know, those guys at corporate won't let us buy it yet, but we want to do a structured deal or something with rights, in which case we'll say, okay, that's your capital risk, guys. So different speeds. All right, I think we're out of time. Thanks for coming, everybody.